Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are taking on a titan of the stage, a man who became, well, an accidental revolutionary, and you could argue, the first true celebrity composer of the modern age, Giuseppe Verdi.
Hmm.
When you listen to his music, the grand scale, the aching drama, it's so easy to feel you know the man, but the reality is far more complex.
Indeed. When you hear the name Verdi, you immediately think of those massive, unforgettable Italian melodies and dramatic duets, pieces that really define the Ottocento.
Right.
But our mission today, as we dive deep into this stack of biographical and musical scholarship, is to look behind that velvet curtain and uncover the intensely private individual who crafted that public icon.
That's right. Our source material spans his entire life, from his truly humble origins to his final, almost philosophical masterpieces, and it reveals a composer who is as savvy a businessman and landowner as he was, well, a musical genius. We're going deep into the stack to understand the real Verdi, warts and all.
Our mission for you, the listener, is really multifaceted. First, we need to trace his dramatic personal journey. A life marked by overwhelming early tragedy, followed by incredible financial success, and then punctuated by significant domestic scandal that absolutely affected his art.
And second, we have to contextualize his powerful, if sometimes reluctant, political role during the fight for Italian unification, the Risorgimento. His name literally became a rallying cry, whether he wanted it to or not.
And third, and this is where it gets really fascinating,
Right.
for music lovers and anyone interested in theatrical history, we're going to track the stunning evolution of his musical language. We'll see how he progressed through 4 distinct creative periods, consciously dismantling established operatic structures, what we call the Code Rossini, to create a new standard of profound theatrical and psychological realism.
Okay, let's unpack this from the very beginning. We need to start by understanding the soil in which this titan grew. When we talk about 19th century composers, that rags to riches story often begins with the struggling peasant. Verdi certainly had humble beginnings, but let's challenge that widely accepted peasant myth he himself later encouraged.
Absolutely. And that myth was a powerful tool for him. It served his image as a self-made man, independent of the aristocracy. But the record tells a much more nuanced story. Giuseppe Fortunio Francesco Verdi was born in October 1813 in Le Roncole, near Busseto, which was then, interestingly, part of the French Empire.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yes, and he usually celebrated his birthday on the 9th, though the baptismal register is a little ambiguous. It lists him as born yesterday on October 11th, which, could have meant the 9th or the 10th.
And crucially, his parents, Carlo and Luigia, were an innkeeper and a spinner. The scholarship is very clear on this. They were of moderate means, not illiterate peasants. And that distinction really matters because his father, Carlo, was intensely ambitious for his son's education, and that required some capital and, frankly, foresight.
That ambition meant Verdi got an early formal education in Latin, Italian, and the humanities, a really solid intellectual foundation. Musically, he was, unquestionably a prodigy. He was so skilled that by the astonishing age of 8, he became the official paid village organist, succeeding his own teacher.
At 8 years old.
At 8. To do this, he had to walk several kilometers regularly from his village to Busseto to attend an upper school for boys. So he was invested in from a very young age, not just discovered by chance.
So his beginnings were modest, sure, but they certainly weren't deprived of education or aspiration. And this structured start leads directly to the figure who really enabled his early career, Antonio Barezzi.
Barezzi was indispensable. He was a wealthy local wholesale grocer and distiller, a man of commerce, but also what the sources call a manic dilettante of music.
I love that phrase.
It's perfect, isn't it? A passionate amateur who ran a music society. Barezzi saw the potential in the young Verdi, took him in, and became his patron, providing him with access, instruments, funding. He later, of course, formalized that relationship by becoming Verdi's father-in-law when Verdi married his daughter, Margherita.
Barezzi facilitated the next big step, getting to Milan, the undeniable cultural capital of northern Italy. And this is where Verdi famously applied to the Milan Conservatory and was rejected.
A wonderful bit of irony, yes.
For a composer who would later define the entire Italian musical canon, it's amazing.
It was a huge setback, but maybe a stroke of pure fortune. Instead of the rigid academic structure of the conservatory, Barezzi arranged for him to study privately with Vincenzo Lavigna, who had been a maestro concertore at La Scala.
And what exactly does a maestro concertatore do?
Well, think of him as the chief music director. He runs the rehearsals, leads the performance from the keyboard. It's really the highest level of practical musical leadership in the opera house.
So he was studying with someone who intimately understood how opera was actually made, not just the theory behind it.
Exactly. Lavinia's guidance was vital because he encouraged Verdi to attend La Scala constantly. So Verdi just soaked up the atmosphere, hearing the dominant operatic composers of the time, Rossini and Bellini. This exposure refined his dramatic and theatrical sense outside the constraints of some academic ivory tower, preparing him not just to compose music, but to write for the stage.
After studying in Milan, he returns to Busseto, takes up a post as maestro di musica, marries Margherita Barezzi in 1836. Professionally, this period is one of establishment, but personally, it's marked by just a crushing sequence of tragedies that almost stopped his career dead.
The rapidity of the loss is genuinely horrifying to consider. Between 1837 and 1839, he and Margherita lost both of their young children, first Virginia, then Acilio, who died in infancy.
Oh my gosh.
Then tragically, Margherita herself died of encephalitis at only 26, shortly after the loss of their second child. The sources are clear. Verdi was a devoted family man. He was absolutely devastated by losing his entire immediate family in such a brutal, short span of time.
He'd experienced the greatest possible grief, and then to compound that, his professional life completely imploded just as he was trying to restart it. His second opera, a comedy of all things, Un giorno di regno, premiered only months after Margherita's death.
And it was a catastrophe, a total flop. It ran for only one performance. I mean, can you imagine trying to create comedy while consumed by that kind of grief?
No.
The source notes that following this failure and the emotional wreckage, Verdi allegedly vowed he would never compose again. He just felt creatively and emotionally bankrupt.
So how did this man, lost in despair, silenced by grief and failure, transition into the creative storm that would produce the next 2 decades of work? This has to be the Nabucco turning point of 1842.
The credit really goes to Bartolomeo Merli, the La Scala impresario. Merli had faith in Verdi. He'd offered him a contract for 3 works after the respectable run of his first opera, Roberto. He saw the potential, and knowing Verdi was suffering, he essentially forced the issue. He basically compelled him to take a libretto Nabucco that had been rejected by another composer, Otto Nicolai.
And Verdi himself tells this story, right? In his autobiographical sketch. He describes finding the libretto and focusing on that opening chorus, Va, pensiero.
Yes, and he claimed he wrote the music not in some burst of genius, but in a slow, agonizing return to creation. He said, this verse today, tomorrow that, here a note, there a whole phrase. And little by little, the opera was written.
That slow, deliberate effort culminated in just overwhelming success.
Immediate and immense acclaim. Nabucco premiered on March 9, 1842. Its revival later that year at La Scala saw an unprecedented run of 57 performances. This success didn't just salvage his career, it immediately established him as the next great figure in Italian opera. It set the trajectory for his entire professional life.
So Nabucco wasn't just a hit. It really opened the floodgates. It initiated the most punishing phase of his career, a period he famously called his years in the galley.
It was a brutal workload, just demanded by the structure of the Italian operatic system at the time. After Nabucco, Verdi produced 20 new operas, and that's not even counting major revisions, in the 16 years leading up to Un Baio in Maschera.
20 operas in 16 years.
He was the engine, the industrial capacity of Italian opera production, and he felt every minute of it. In 1858, looking back, he complained, since Nabucco, you may say, I have never had 1 hour of peace, 16 years in the galleys.
That is just an astonishing rate of production. Was he just composing for survival at that point?
Initially, yes, to establish himself and earn money, but soon it was just relentless demand. He felt trapped by his own success, by the contracts he signed. In 1845, he wrote this demoralized note saying he had to write 6 operas, then adieu to everything. And the source material suggests this frantic pace often led to compromised quality or severe stress. But this period also forged 2 other crucial aspects of his identity: his financial acumen and his status as a landowner.
Let's focus on that financial side, because that's where we see the transition from struggling artist to wealthy, controlling patriarch. Verdi was a businessman in a way many of his peers were not.
Oh, absolutely. As his popularity soared, he paid extremely close attention to his financial contracts. He understood his value. For perspective, major works like Ernani and Macbeth each brought him 18,000 lire.
And that wasn't just pocket change.
Not at all. This was enough money to dramatically transform his social standing and secure long-term investments. We see this codified in his contracts with the powerful publisher Ricordi starting around 1847. These agreements were meticulously specific about what he would receive, not just for new works, but for various arrangements and first productions all across Europe. He was monetizing every single aspect of his creative output.
And he used that money strategically to establish himself as a wealthy landowner in his home region, which feels like a direct response to the stress of the galley years.
It was. Being rooted in the land gave him both financial security and, importantly, social authority. In 1844, he bought Il Pulgaro, 62 acres of farmland, initially for his parents.
Which all culminates in 1848 when he purchases the property at Sant'Agata near Busseto land that had once belonged to his family, which is a nice full circle moment.
A huge moment. This estate became his permanent retreat. He lived there from 1851 until his death, continually expanding the grounds and the house, now known as the Villa Verdi. By establishing Sant'Agata, he cemented his status as a rentier cum estate owner.
So not just a composer, he's a landlord.
He's an aristocratic landlord, earning passive income from his land and property, which allowed him to control his later musical output and fiercely guard his privacy.
Beyond the business, this punishing period also solidified his key professional and personal relationships. It's where he begins a crucial collaboration with the librettist Francesco Maria Piave.
Piave was instrumental. He collaborated on numerous operas, including Hernani and I Du Foscari. He was a reliable craftsman, which was essential for keeping up that pace. But maybe the most enduring and intimate professional relationship was with Emanuele Muzio, whom Verdi took on as his only pupil in 1844.
And Muzio was so much more than a student, wasn't he? He was an indispensable amanuensis, an assistant, eventually a trusted friend, an executor. He really embodied the devotion Verdi inspired in those close to him.
There's a wonderful letter from Muzio to Brezzi highlighting this. He wrote, "I seem more like a friend rather than his pupil. We are always together at dinner, in the cafes when we play cards. All in all, he doesn't go anywhere without me at his side."
That's incredible.
And Muzio later became a conductor of Verdi's works outside Italy, managing the foreign premieres. It just illustrates how Verdi cultivated loyalty and competence in his professional circle.
And then there is the personal relationship that defined his maturity, Giuseppina Strepponi. Their relationship began around 1843. She was a famous soprano whose voice was declining, and she was known in society for her amorous relationships and many illegitimate children.
And that background, combined with their decision to live together openly without marriage at Sant'Agata for years, well, it becomes a massive social and moral factor in his life. The scandal they generated leads directly into the next period, and critically, into the subjects he chose for his greatest operas. The public artist was beginning to reflect his complex private life.
While that private life was brewing with controversy, professionally his mastery was deepening, culminating in some major international triumphs. You singled out Macbeth as a key indicator of his evolving style.
Yes, Macbeth from 1847 was uniquely important to him. He dedicated it to his patron Barezzi and valued it above all my other operas. This work showed a conscious attempt to depart from standard formulas, focusing instead on stark dramatic realism. He even asked his singers not to sing beautifully. He wanted the dramatic effect.
And we see his musical mind working in these complex ways, like his approach to key signatures.
Precisely. For instance, he generally used sharp keys for the Macbeth themselves, representing their ambition and, their moral sharpness, while the witches often sang in flat keys. It was a very novel, atmospheric, and psychologically informed approach to characterization. That attention to the tinta, or the color of the piece, is evidence he was already thinking well beyond simple set pieces.
Then in 1847, he's conducting the premiere of I Masnadieri in London, which was a royal affair attended by Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. This really solidified his status as a European commodity.
And he was always pragmatic about that status. When he adapted I Lombardi for the Paris Opera, it became Jerusalem. And sources detail that he had to make significant changes, critically adding an extensive ballet scene. This was a mandatory requirement to meet Parisian expectations for the genre of grand opera.
So he was willing to compromise on structure if the market demanded it, which just confirms him as this savvy professional who knew how to earn money and maintain influence in different markets.
And we can't forget the flash of intense patriotism that capped this period around 1848. Hearing the news of the 5 days of fighting in Milan that temporarily drove out the Austrians, Verdi raced back, drunk with joy.
He channeled that revolutionary energy directly into his work, writing to Piave, urging him to banish every petty municipal idea. We must all extend a fraternal hand, and Italy will yet become the first nation of the world.
Which led directly to the Battaglia di Legnano in 1849. It premiered shortly after Rome became a republic, featuring a tenor hero proclaiming, "Whoever dies for the fatherland cannot be evil-minded." Those are the early explicit moments when his art and politics became powerfully intertwined, setting the stage for his incredible middle period.
The next phase, roughly 1849 to 1860, is Verdi's middle period, and it's characterized by the three operas that really form the foundational core of Italian opera worldwide. These are the triple peaks of fame: Rigoletto, Il Trovatore, and La Traviata.
This era solidified his international dominance. And importantly, Verdi was now successful enough to dictate terms, rather than just fulfilling commissions. Il Trovatore, for example, was the first opera he wrote without a specific commission since his very first work. He had finally achieved creative independence.
Which allowed him to choose subjects that deeply resonated with his own worldview.
Exactly.
But control over the music didn't mean control over the morality police. This era is defined by his intense battles against the censors, who found his subjects too volatile too, regicide adjacent, or just too sexually problematic for the conservative European stages.
The censors were indeed his constant antagonists. His opera Staffelio failed partly because they took offense at the perceived adultery of a clergyman's wife, but the major fight, the huge one, was over Rigoletto, based on Victor Hugo's Le Roi s'amuse.
Right.
The censors in Venice were just outraged by the planned murder of royalty and the overall sordid nature of the story, centered on corruption and vengeance.
And Verdi refused to budge on the core element that made the tragedy work: the character of the hunchbacked hero.
He was completely unyielding. He wrote to his team, "I see the hero has been made no longer ugly and hunchback. Why? A singing hunchback. Why not? If they are removed, I can no longer set it to music." He argued that the moral qualities of the character, his capacity for passionate love and grief, lay beneath that outwardly deformed and ridiculous exterior.
He eventually had to substitute a duke for the king, but he kept the essential moral contradiction of Rigoletto intact.
He did. The ultimate vindication, of course, was the music itself. And this brings up one of the most famous anecdotes in music history, confirming Verdi's early recognition of a potential viral hit, or what we now call an earworm.
La donna è mobile.
We're talking about La donna è mobile, Woman is Fickle, the Duke's instantly memorable song from Act 3 of Rigoletto. Verdi knew this melody was so insanely catchy, so irresistible, that it presented a significant commercial risk.
And what was his masterful strategy to protect his intellectual property?
He deliberately excluded it from full orchestral and cast rehearsals. He rehearsed the tenor separately and under strict secrecy, instructing him not to whistle or hum it outside the rehearsal room. He knew that if the melody got out before the premiere, it would be pirated instantly by street musicians, hooty-gurty players, music publishers, you name it.
It would cut into the novelty and the financial success of the opera.
Completely. And the strategy worked. The audience heard it first in the theater, and by the next morning, it was being whistled all across Venice. It ensured the opera's immediate overwhelming success and protected Verdi's financial interests in an age before robust international copyright. It's an incredible insight into his business mind.
This professional shrewdness and the intensity of his dramatic choices, it brings us back to his complex private life. The tension between the globally acclaimed artist and the private man is perfectly encapsulated in the subject matter he was choosing. We talked about Verdi living openly with Giuseppina Strepponi at Sant'Agata without being married. Despite his fame and fortune, this arrangement led to Strepponi being socially shunned by the deeply conservative Busseto community.
And while Verdi might have put on a brave face, Strepponi certainly felt the sting of that moral judgment. And critics, drawing a direct line between the composer's life and his art, have identified a remarkable thematic pattern here.
Which is?
The observation is striking. 6 of the 8 operas written during this middle period, from Louisa Miller through La Traviata, feature heroines who suffer grief, death, or social ruin because of sexual transgression, actual or perceived.
So Violetta in La Traviata, the courtesan dying of consumption and social isolation. Gilda in Rigoletto, whose life is destroyed by the Duke's licentiousness.
All of them? The subject center on the suffering of women judged by society. The argument is that these deeply resonant tragedies were not just random choices, but a way for Verdi to channel the societal judgment that he and Strepponi faced in their own home.
He's fighting societal norms through the medium he controlled best.
Precisely. He took the emotional reality of his difficult, unconventional relationship and placed it front and center on the world stage, validating the passion while exposing the hypocrisy of the judging society.
Musically, this period marks Verdi's decisive break from the previous generation's established structures, what you called the Code Rossini.
The Code Rossini essentially defined early 19th century Italian opera. Predictable structures based on standardized set pieces. For example, an aria would typically follow a four-part structure. A slow, lyrical introduction called a cavatina, a middle section, a fast, brilliant conclusion called a cavaletta, and a final flourish.
And Verdi found this predictable and dramatically stifling.
Completely. He explicitly wrote that he would be happy if one could avoid beginning with an opening chorus because he wanted immediate drama, not formal ceremony. He was moving away from the large-scale oratorio characteristics of his early works towards continuous musical flow, individual psychological action, and intense theatrical intrigue.
La Traviata being a prime example of this new adventure.
It was revolutionary. It pushed toward true theatrical realism by setting the drama in the contemporary world with contemporary dress. Although for the premiere, management forced him to set it back in the 18th century, fearing the scandal of contemporary Parisian courtesans would be too much for the audience.
Even with that forced historical change, the music achieved the realism.
Yes. The ending, where the heroine, Violetta, dies realistically and intimately from consumption, that was unprecedented on the operatic stage at the time. It was a non-heroic personal death, depicting suffering with musical subtlety.
And his growing command of contrasting elements is masterful here.
Oh, absolutely. Think about placing the cynical, flippant La Donna è mobile immediately before the deeply emotional and complex quartet Bella figlia dell'amore in Rigoletto. That juxtaposition highlights changing moods and moral confusion with staggering efficiency.
So by 1853, with these triple peaks behind him, Verdi had achieved everything. Fame, wealth, critical acclaim, artistic independence. He enters a phase of consolidation and greatly reduces his output.
A significant pivot point. He wrote 16 operas in the 11 years before Traviata, but only 6 new works for the stage in the following 18 years up to Aida. He had earned the right to step back, focusing intensely on his estate and his financial security.
He really settled into the role of the aristocratic landowner. He described his life then as a total abandonment of music, a little reading, some light occupation with agriculture and horses, that's all.
He became the definition of the powerful, private country gentleman. And the social factor with Giuseppina was finally resolved in 1859. After years of public scandal, they married secretly. The ceremony was small, taking place in Collonges-sous-Salève, then part of Piedmont.
And the guest list speaks volumes about their desire for privacy.
Minimal is an understatement. Only 2 witnesses were present, the coachman who drove them there and the church bell ringer. After all the public drama, the composer and the soprano finally solidified their relationship quietly, on their own terms.
While Verdi was remodeling Santa Agata and acting the part of the agriculturalist, his music was being used for the massive political movement of the 19th century. The Risorgimento, the Italian unification movement.
Right. His political identity and his art became inseparable in the public eye.
His music was intensely identified with unification, but it's crucial for us to separate the enduring patriotic myth from the historical reality, especially regarding the most famous chorus of all, Va Pensiero.
The chorus of the Hebrew slaves from Nabucco, yes. The myth is that the audience demanded an encore of it in a nationalistic frenzy, openly defying an Austrian ban on encores, turning the theater into a revolutionary hotbed.
But that's not quite what happened.
The truth, based on meticulous scholarship, is a little less dramatic, but still powerful. The piece that actually got the encore that night was the hymn Immenso Jehovah. However, and this is a key point, the chorus did resonate profoundly with patriots. The lines lamenting the loss of a homeland, "Oh, my country, so lovely and so lost," spoke directly to the Italian desire for freedom. So the chorus quickly became an emotional, cultural anthem.
So even if the origin story is a little embellished, the cultural impact was absolutely real. But the most explicit political use of his name came with that infamous acronym that started circulating, especially in Naples, in 1859. The famous Viva Verdi slogan.
Exactly. It wasn't simply shouting, "Long live the composer." It was a coded message, a simple but brilliant act of political signaling. Verdi stood for Vittorio Emanuele Re d'Italia, meaning "Long live Victor Emmanuel II, King of Italy."
That's truly fascinating. It was a safe way for patriots to express their revolutionary sentiments in public, using an artistic hero as a kind of shield.
Precisely. And after unification was achieved in 1861, many of his earlier operas, even conventional love stories, were retrospectively reinterpreted as having hidden revolutionary messages. Verdi became a symbol of Italy itself.
And he was pulled directly into the political arena by the architect of unification, Count Cavour.
Cavour saw the immense symbolic power of having the nation's greatest artists involved. Verdi was elected to the first Italian parliament in 1861. He later accepted an appointment as a senator in 1874. But the source material is very clear. Verdi was an artist, not a bureaucrat, and certainly not a full-time legislator.
If he was so reluctant, was his involvement purely symbolic?
Primarily symbolic, but he didn't neglect his duties entirely. He accepted the role from Cavour out of profound respect for the man and the cause, but he confided that he would resign after a few months. He attended only a few sessions. As a senator, he was almost completely absent, though he used his wealth and influence for major philanthropic causes later on.
Professionally, this late middle period is defined by the massive shadow of French influence, specifically the genre of grand opera.
This was a necessity for international success. Grand opera meant longer works, 5 acts, huge scope, large casts, complex historical plots, and critically, an extensive ballet scene. The operas from Le Vep Sicilienne through Ada really reflect this shift.
This shift introduced more colorful orchestration and greater spectacle, but what distinguishes Verdi's grand opera from, say, Meyerbeer's?
Unlike some of his contemporaries who might use spectacle purely as decoration, Verdi integrated it deeply into the drama. Even in works like Don Carlos, the sheer spectacle, the massive crowds, the political machinations, is essential to the drama. The music remains taut, and he uses the scale to amplify the personal tragedy, not distract from it.
This all culminated in Aida in 1871, which has one of the most interesting origin stories, linking his work directly to global events.
Aida was commissioned by the Egyptian government for the new Khedivial Opera House, built to celebrate the opening of the Suez Canal. Verdi was paid the enormous sum of 150,000 francs.
A staggering amount.
A truly staggering amount. And despite this financial incentive, he confessed that ancient Egypt was a civilization I have never been able to admire. A classic Verdi grumble, showing his focus was always on the drama and the musical execution, not the exotic setting.
And the triumphal march in Aida is the ultimate expression of that grand opera influence.
Absolutely. It's grand opera at its peak. But what makes it Verdi is that even within that spectacle, the drama remains personal. The emotional weight rests on Aida, the slave, forced to choose between her love for the general and her loyalty to her country. Verdi ensures the massive scale amplifies, rather than dwarfs, the emotional core.
Amid supervising the intense Italian productions of Aida, where he was effectively the producer, demanding high standards, he produced his most unusual and only surviving piece of chamber music.
The string quartet in E minor, written during rehearsals in Naples in 1873, it's an anomaly. It stands as his sole surviving chamber work and the only major 19th century quartet by an Italian composer. It's a lively, sophisticated piece, and the last movement, a technically complex fugue, shows he hadn't lost the academic skill he learned from Lavinia decades earlier.
Following Aida, we get the monumental Messa de Requiem in 1874. This piece is often criticized as opera in ecclesiastical dress. Why did critics apply that label, and why is it maybe unfair?
It was completed to honor the great Italian poet Alessandro Manzoni, and critics applied the label because it was scored for operatic forces, massive chorus, huge orchestra, star soloists, and because the musical techniques, the dramatic vocal writing, were so clearly drawn from the operatic stage.
But the purpose and the execution are distinct from the stage, correct?
Precisely. It's profoundly theatrical in scale, but the emotions are distinct. Critics have noted its fundamentally troubled tone and distinct lack of consolation. One said, the prospect of hell appears to rule. It captures human anxiety about mortality, fear, and judgment. Profound, universal human drama, not necessarily the solace you expect in liturgical music.
This work also solidified his personal association with the spinto soprano, Teresa Stoltz. What exactly defines a spinto soprano?
A spinto soprano voice. It means pushed or driven. It requires the lyrical quality for romantic roles like Aida, but also the power and dramatic punch to cut through a massive orchestra during intense dramatic scenes, or, in the case of the Requiem, the immense dies irae. Stoltz, who premiered Aida in Europe and was the soloist for the Requiem, fit this mold perfectly. She remained a companion to Verdi until his death.
The Requiem cemented Verdi's status as the undisputed presiding genius of Italian music, and by the time it premiered, many people thought he was finished composing.
But the greatest surprises of his career were still ahead.
For over a decade after the Requiem, Verdi seemed content to live the life of the aristocratic landowner. But then, in his 70s, he surprised the world with an astonishing return to the stage. This final period is defined by his late career partnership with a man who had once been his public critic, Arrigo Boito.
This partnership is fascinating. Boito, a poet and composer, had been part of a younger generation that criticized Verdi's earlier reliance on formula. But the publisher, Giulio Ricordi, engineered their reconciliation, knowing that Boito was maybe the only librettist talented enough to challenge Verdi. Boito proposed an opera based on Shakespeare's Othello.
The composition was slow, highly secretive, delayed by Verdi's revisions of earlier works like Simon Boccanegra and Don Carlos. But Otello finally premiered triumphantly in 1887, 16 years after Aida, proving his creative powers were not only intact, but had deepened considerably.
The musical world was watching, especially because Richard Wagner's influence was at its peak. Many critics sought or claimed to find Wagnerian aspects in Otello, the continuous music, the complex orchestral texture.
But the analysis shows he wasn't embracing the new German school. He was synthesizing decades of his own dramatic practice. Why did his approach remain so fundamentally Italian?
Well, while the musical texture is continuous, Verdi always prioritized the vocal line and dramatic climax above systematic leitmotivic theory. His music was driven by dramatic realism, not philosophical manifestos. You see this in the powerful, unique storm that opens the opera in medias, plunging you right into the chaos.
And the concept of tinta, that golden thread of musical color, is used so profoundly here.
Absolutely. The memory of the love duet from Act 1 is recalled in Otello's dying words in Act 4. This provides emotional and psychological continuity, Verdi's tinta, without resorting to the dense, systematic leitmotifs associated with Wagner. He took what he needed from modern orchestral practice, but remained fiercely committed to the Italian emphasis on the voice as the vessel for passion.
After achieving such profound tragedy with Otello, Verdi, now approaching 80, decided he needed a lighter note for his finale.
He famously joked that after having relentlessly massacred so many heroes and heroines, I have at last the right to laugh a little. So Boito, understanding the master's desire for one final challenge, secretly drafted a comic libretto based on Shakespeare's The Merry Wives of Windsor.
And even in his old age, Verdi embraced the project with just extraordinary enthusiasm.
His letters to Boito are electric. He wrote, "So be it. So let's do Falstaff. For now, let's not think of obstacles, of age, of illnesses."
Yeah.
And using his own capital letters and exclamation points, reflecting his sheer joy, he wrote, "What joy to be able to say to the public, here we are again, come and see us."
Falstaff in 1893 was a crowning achievement, a truly dazzling finale. Royalty, aristocracy, leading critics all attended the premiere. Musically, why is Falstaff considered such a monumental, forward-looking achievement?
Well, one critic notes that the listener is bombarded by a stunning diversity of rhythms, orchestral textures, melodic motifs, and harmonic devices. It is a miracle of energy. Another describes it as Verdi miniaturizing himself and the previous forms of romantic Italian opera. Instead of long arias, you have these short, crystal-clear phrases that embody complex feelings. It's a nonstop rush of ensemble singing and musical wit.
And it ends with that profound philosophical statement, an opera buffa fugue that sums up his entire life philosophy.
The famous concluding fugue features the lines, "Tutto nel mondo è burla, ma ride vincere la risata final." Everything in the world is a jest, but he laughs well, who laughs the final laugh. It's a witty, detached final curtain call for a composer who specialized in the intense drama of human folly.
In his last years, Verdi turned his attention wholly toward philanthropy, securing his legacy as a man who used his wealth for the common good.
His crowning philanthropic achievement was planning, building, and endowing the Casa di Riposo per Musicisti, the rest home for musicians in Milan. It was a final, massive act of generosity to his professional community, ensuring dignity for aging artists. He also built a hospital in Villanova Solarda. His final major composition was the choral Four Sacred Pieces in 1898.
Verdi died in Milan in 1901 after a stroke. The scale of the public grief reflected his stature as a national, almost mythical figure.
His body was initially buried privately, but a month later it was moved to the crypt of the Casa di Riposo. The demonstration of national mourning was immense. Arturo Toscanini conducted a chorus of 820 singers performing Va Pensiero. The sources estimate that 300,000 people were in attendance, a monumental send-off that affirmed his place not just as a composer, but as a symbol of united Italy.
Let's pull back now and look at the man behind the music and the myths he so carefully cultivated. The source describes him as an intensely private man who built legends about himself and was, frankly, a bit of a grumbler.
John Rosselli sums him up with admirable honesty. Verdi was an intensely private man who deeply resented efforts to inquire into his personal affairs. He fostered legends about his peasant origins and was characterized by some as an autocratic rentier, come estate owner, part-time composer, and seemingly full-time grumbler.
So he had become so wealthy and controlling that he ran his estate and his musical output like a powerful, independent landlord.
Precisely. Yet critics agree that beneath the grumbling and the carefully constructed facade, a deep integrity runs beneath his life. He was awkward in society, preferring the quiet of Santa Gata to the intrusion of journalists and high society.
What about his spiritual life? He wrote the monumental Requiem, but was he a man of faith?
His religious beliefs were vague at best. Strepponi wrote in 1871 that he was not much of a believer, though, in that unique blend of pragmatism and traditionalism, he did build a chapel at Santa Gata. The troubled tone of the Requiem is telling. It focuses on the terror and anxiety of judgment rather than offering Christian consolation.
Shifting to his unique musical spirit, the philosopher Isaiah Berlin classified Verdi as a naive artist. Now that term sounds almost insulting for a genius of his stature, yet it's a profound philosophical categorization. What did Berlin mean?
It's based on a dichotomy developed by Schiller. A naive artist is one who embodies their artistic vision naturally, without needing self-conscious theory or philosophical manifestos. They simply do the vision, intuitively reaching dramatic truth.
This contrasts sharply with the sentimental artist, the category where Wagner sits.
Exactly. Wagner sought to recreate nature based on internal philosophy, detailed aesthetic theories, a constant need to explain his revolutionary intent. It makes perfect sense, considering Verdi was recorded as expressing genuine confusion about philosophical music. He focused solely on dramatic truth and passion, not academic justification.
And this commitment to dramatic truth is unified by his key musical concept. Tinta, literally meaning color. Verdi himself called it the golden thread that binds all the parts together of an opera.
And we can see how tinta works in practice in Rigoletto. The tinta there isn't just one melody, but a pervasive atmosphere. The most striking example is the recurring, powerful musical motif associated with Monterone's curse.
Ah, yes.
This motif, a dark, descending figure, is not a Wagnerian leitmotif. It's an emotional symbol. It appears immediately after the curse, often in the orchestra, binding Rigoletto's subsequent paranoia and tragedy throughout the entire opera. It ensures the piece is a cohesive, unified theatrical experience built around the consequences of a single fateful action.
This insistence on musical and dramatic unity transcended the traditional formulaic structure of early Italian opera. Finally, let's look at his enduring legacy. He was esteemed at his death, but how does his work resonate culturally now, 120 years later?
He remains globally esteemed. All of his 29 operas are recorded and frequently staged worldwide, and his cultural reach extends far beyond the opera house, popping up in fascinating modern contexts.
Like Jonathan Miller's famous 1982 production of Rigoletto, which set the story among modern American mafiosi.
Which demonstrates that the themes of corruption, revenge, and the abuse of power are just timeless. Or the solemn, powerful use of excerpts from his Requiem at the funeral of Diana, Princess of Wales, in 1997. The theatrical scope provided the appropriate emotional weight for a global tragedy.
Perhaps the most visceral example of his continuing political symbolism occurred in 2011.
That event was extraordinary. During a performance of Nabucco in Rome, conductor Riccardo Muti stopped after Va Pensiero to address the audience about cuts in state cultural funding. In a spontaneous, powerful act of unity, the entire audience, including parliamentarians, joined Muti in the chorus in an encore, reminding everyone that this music is still a living symbol of national identity.
And even popular culture gets in on the act. Katy Perry wore a dress embroidered with music from La Traviata to the Grammys,
Proving his melodies remain part of the global cultural lexicon.
So, what does this all mean? We've traced the complex tapestry of the man. The financial genius who secured his independence through land, the grieving widower who channeled personal tragedy into his art, the reluctant politician whose name became a revolutionary acronym, and the innovator who consciously shattered the confines of traditional Italian opera to create profound realism.
He achieved wealth, authority, and immortality, all while remaining stubbornly resistant to the public glare. He took the established forms of the Ottocento and imbued them with a new psychological truth, ensuring his characters, however flawed, sang with authentic, passionate voices that speak to us still.
As we wrap up this deep dive, let's go back to one of the most interesting business moves of his career, the secrecy surrounding La Donna e Mobile. Verdi knew this tune would be a massive hit, and he withheld it from all but one tenor to prevent piracy and ensure the initial commercial success of the opera.
He was a consummate realist, intensely focused on financial security and the integrity of his artistic products. He had an eye not just for a good tune, but for its value, its market potential, and its proper application.
So, given that Verdi valued knowledge, application, and critical thinking above all else, what would he make of this early maneuver? Was it simply business savvy and early recognition of the power and danger of a viral earworm? And if Verdi, the shrewd businessman and realist, felt the need to manage the release of his most valuable creative assets 170 years ago, how might that philosophy inform how modern creators and media companies manage creative assets today, in a world where piracy is instantaneous and viral success is fleeting and immediate?
It's a great question.
That idea of controlling the release of intellectual properties seems more relevant now than ever.
It absolutely does. It suggests that the strategy of prevention is better than cure, whether you're dealing with 19th century street musicians or 21st century file sharing, is a timeless principle for the successful creative professional. He was simply ahead of his time in understanding commercial value.
That's a fascinating question for you to ponder. That's all the time we have for this deep dive into the life and works of Giuseppe Verdi. Thank you for joining us.